They thought the nightmare ended when they escaped the tower, but something followed. A whisper in the wind, a hum in the mirror, waiting for the right moment to strike again. When Mark finally speaks a name, everything changes, but not in the way anyone expects. Stay with this story till the very last second, because the truth will hit harder than you think. If you crave more stories of suspense, betrayal, and impossible choices, subscribe now and tell me in the comments, who do you think the real villain is? Rain pounded against the cracked windows of the old farmhouse, the kind of rain that felt like it was trying to wash something away. But no matter how hard it fell, it couldn't cleanse what happened inside those walls. They say a person's eyes never lie. If that's true, then the eyes of Deputy Mark Harris told a story nobody wanted to hear. Because Mark had seen something he refused to speak about for 20 years. It began in the summer of 2005, deep in the quiet outskirts of Missouri. A patch of land, bought by a Thai-American family, the Thanaporns, who wanted nothing more than peace. They planted lemongrass by the porch, hung wind chimes carved with Buddhist symbols, and cooked dishes whose aromas carried across the empty road. Spicy tom yum simmering in the pot, sticky rice cooling in woven baskets. But peace is fragile in a small American town. Whispers travel faster than truth. And when 11-year-old Molly Thanaporn vanished without a sound, the town stopped whispering and started pointing. Mark remembered the night she disappeared. The humidity clung to the skin. Cicadas sang their endless song, and the moonlight spilled like silver across the cornfields. The Thanaporns had been at the annual summer fair, selling sauté skewers and mango sticky rice. By the time they returned home, Molly's room was empty. Her shoes were neatly placed by the door. Her favorite book, an old English-Thai picture dictionary, was still open on her bed. The sheriff called it a runaway case at first. Kids wander, he said, but Mark knew better. The footprints in the dirt didn't match Molly's. And there was a second set leading toward the abandoned water tower on the edge of town. That tower had its own legend. Teens claimed they heard voices there at night. Some swore they saw lights inside, though it hadn't been powered in decades. Mark went there once, years before Molly's disappearance, and found strange offerings, bundles of flowers, coins, even food, left in the shadows. He thought it was kids fooling around. Now he wasn't so sure. Days turned into weeks. Posters faded in the sun. The Thanaporn family stopped cooking for fare. Neighbors stopped looking them in the eye. And then, one night, Mark's radio crackled with a call he would never forget. A voice, thin, trembling, almost drowned by static, whispered, "She's not gone. She's here." The line went dead. It came from a payphone. A payphone that had been disconnected for over 10 years. Mark didn't tell the sheriff. He didn't tell anyone, because in that moment, he understood something. Someone in town knew exactly where Molly was. And whoever it was, they wanted him to find her, but they also wanted him to understand it would cost him everything. That night, he drove back to the water tower. The air smelled different, sweet like incense. A faint flicker danced in the darkness above, and then, from somewhere inside, he heard it. The melody drifted down the rusted metal walls, soft but steady, like a lullaby meant for no one else to hear. Mark froze at the base of the tower, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. The song was old. He'd heard Molly hum it once while helping her mother set up their food stand. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping over graffiti and peeling paint. Halfway up the stairs, the air grew warmer, heavy with the scent of jasmine and something faintly metallic. The steps creaked under his boots, each one a warning. When he reached the platform, he found candles arranged in a circle. Melted wax dripped like frozen tears down the metal. In the center sat a small wooden box, carved with patterns he recognized from the Thanaporn's home, intricate lotus flowers, curling vines. The singing stopped. Silence pressed in. Mark's breath felt too loud. He crouched and reached for the box. A shadow moved in the corner, not the twitch of candlelight. Something solid. Someone was there, standing just beyond the glow. The figure stepped forward, and Mark's stomach tightened. It was Mrs. Thanaporn. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling, yet her voice was calm when she spoke. "You shouldn't be here, deputy." Mark glanced at the box again. What's inside? Her gaze dropped to the floor, avoiding him. It's all I have left of her. A gust of wind blew through the cracks in the tower, snuffing out 2 candles. The shadows deepened, stretching across the floor. Then Mark noticed something else. Another shadow behind Mrs. Thanaporn. Tall, still, unmoving, even as the candlelight flickered. And then it breathed. The sound was slow, deliberate, like someone taking their time to draw the air deep into their lungs. Mark's hand drifted toward the holster at his hip, but Mrs. Thanaporn's sharp whisper froze him. Don't. The tall shadows shifted, revealing the outline of a man, broad shoulders, face hidden beneath the brim of a cap. His boots were wet, mud caked thick along the soles, as though he had just walked through the cornfields. Mark's flashlight trembled slightly in his grip as he angled it upward. The beam caught the man's face for only a split second, just long enough to see eyes that seemed to glint with something between recognition and warning. Deputy Harris, the man said, voice low and steady. You're looking in the wrong places. Mark's pulse hammered in his ears. Then tell me the right one. The man stepped closer, boots thudding softly on the metal floor. I could, but you won't like where it leads. Mrs. Thanaporn's breathing quickened. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. He has nothing to do with this, she said, though her voice cracked as she spoke. Mark kept his eyes on the man. Where's Molly? The man tilted his head slightly, as if weighing something. Then he pointed toward the small wooden box between the candles. Mark swallowed hard and reached out. The wood was warm beneath his fingers, unnaturally so. He lifted the lid. Inside was a strip of fabric, bright yellow, patterned with tiny white flowers. It was stained dark in one corner. Mark recognized it instantly. It was the ribbon Molly used to tie her hair the day she vanished. Before he could speak, the man leaned in close enough for Mark to smell the damp earth on his clothes. She's still wearing the rest of it, he murmured. From somewhere deep below, in the darkness beneath the tower, came the sound of something moving. Slow, dragging, coming closer. The dragging sound echoed through the hollow metal structure, each scrape vibrating up Mark's legs. It was heavy, uneven, like something being pulled across wet ground. Mrs. Thanaporn's eyes filled with panic, but she didn't move toward the stairs. Instead, she stepped back into the shadows, as though she knew exactly what was coming. Mark's flashlight swept over the grated floor, catching flashes of movement far below, just enough to see a pale shape shifting in the dark. A shape that seemed too small to be a grown man, yet too wrong to be a child. The man in the cap didn't flinch. She doesn't like strangers, he said quietly, and she hates the light. Mark's instinct screamed to run, but his feet stayed rooted. The dragging grew louder, closer, until it was right beneath the platform. A soft, wet sound followed, a breath, but not from lungs. Then came the voice. Hi, fragile, almost sweet. Mark. It was Molly's voice, exactly as it had been the last time he heard her, playful, innocent. Only now, there was something else in it, something hollow. Mark gripped the railing and leaned over, shining the flashlight downward. The beam caught a face for only a moment. It was hers. It was smiling, but the skin, it wasn't right. Too pale, stretched too thin, eyes glistened like they belonged to something that had been waiting a very long time. Come down, she whispered, reaching one small, trembling hand toward him. And just behind her in the blackness, something moved with her. Something large, its outline barely visible, its fingers resting gently on her shoulder as if to remind her she wasn't alone. Mark's throat went dry. That hand, those fingers, were far too long, bending at unnatural angles as they draped over Molly's small frame. The thing in the shadows didn't speak, but its presence filled the air like static before a storm. Molly's smile didn't fade. Please, Mark, I'm cold. Her voice wavered on the last word, and for a heartbeat, he almost believed she was just a lost child. Almost. The man in the cap stepped closer to the railing, his gaze fixed on the thing behind her. She came back, he murmured, but not the way you wanted. Mark turned sharply toward him. What is that? The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch tied with red thread. Ty's script was painted in gold across the fabric, the letters smeared from age. He tossed it at Mark's feet. Don't open it unless you're ready to see what's holding her here. Below, Molly's head tilted just slightly, the way a curious child might. The thing behind her shifted, its shape rippling in the dark like smoke clinging to bone. Mark's heartbeat pounded in his ears. What happens if I don't open it? The man's eyes met his. Then she takes you instead. A sudden metallic groan filled the tower, as if the whole structure had exhaled. The candles flickered wildly. From below, Molly's voice came again, this time sharper, urgent. Mark, come down. Now. Her hand reached higher toward the platform, and in the instant before his flashlight beam wavered, he saw the truth. Her fingers were no longer small. They were growing. The fingers stretched like strands of pale wax, curling over the edge of the platform with deliberate slowness. Each nail was dark, cracked, and far too sharp for a child. Metal groaned beneath her grip as she pulled herself higher. Mark stumbled back, every instinct screaming at him to run, but the man in the cap didn't move. He simply watched, as if this was something he had seen before. You've got seconds, the man said quietly. Once she's on this level, you can't stop her. Mrs. Thanaporn was pressed against the wall now, hands covering her mouth. Her eyes shone with grief, so deep it looked like it had been carved into her bones. She's still my daughter, she whispered, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Molly's face emerged over the platform edge. The smile was wider now, too wide, splitting the skin at the corners of her mouth. Her eyes, once soft and brown, were pools of glistening black. Mark's flashlight beam caught the faint shimmer of something wet running down her cheek. Not a tear, but thick, dark streaks that dripped to the floor. Don't you remember me? She asked. Her voice carried that same hollow sweetness, but underneath it was something else, something hungry. The man in the cap nodded toward the pouch at Mark's feet. Open it. Now! Mark hesitated, only a second before tearing the red thread loose. The fabric fell open in his hand. In a sudden burst of warm, spiced air hit his face, lemongrass, incense, and something coppery beneath it. Inside was a small, polished mirror no larger than his palm. Its surface wasn't glass, but something dark and almost liquid, rippling faintly even though the air was still. The moment the pouch opened, Molly froze. Her smile faltered, and the thing behind her shifted back into the shadows, as if retreating from the sight of it. The man's voice was sharp now. Don't let her touch it. Make her see her own face. Mark raised a mirror toward her. For the first time, Molly's voice cracked. No! Her fingers lashed forward, stretching toward him faster than he could react. Mark stumbled back as her elongated fingers whipped through the air, slicing the space where his face had been a heartbeat earlier. The mirror trembled in his grip, its surface swirling faster now, as though it could feel her presence. Molly's breath came in sharp, animal-like bursts. Her black eyes locked on the mirror, but she didn't move closer. The thing behind her, though, it did. From the shadows, it unfolded. Not stepped, not crawled, unfolded. Its limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. Its head tilting at an impossible angle, as though it were studying both Mark and the man in the cap at once. The faint light revealed patches of something clinging to it, scraps of fabric, strands of hair, bits of ribbon. Molly, Mrs. Thanaporn's voice broke. Trembling, don't look. The creature's long fingers tightened on her shoulders, almost possessive. Mark realized then it wasn't standing behind her. It was attached to her. The man in the cap stepped forward, his voice low and steady. She isn't your daughter anymore, not all of her. That thing's been feeding off her since the night she disappeared. Mark kept the mirror raised, taking a slow step forward. What happens if she sees? The man's eyes didn't leave the creature. She'll remember what she really is now. Molly's lips quivered, and for the first time, there was no smile. She shook her head violently, strands of hair whipping across her face. Mark, please don't. The mirror's surface shimmered like black water under moonlight. A low hum began to rise from it, vibrating in Mark's bones. The thing's grip on her tightened, claws digging into her skin. Mark took another step closer, angling the mirror toward her face. She let out a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob, as her eyes caught the reflection. And then everything went silent. Her body jerked once, twice, as if something inside was trying to tear free. The creature let out a shriek so loud it rattled the metal walls, its form warping, peeling away from her in tendrils of shadow. But as it came loose, Mark saw something in its shape, a second face. And this one he recognized. It was a man's face, pale and gaunt, with deep-set eyes that seemed to burn through shadows. Mark's chest tightened. He knew that face from the old missing persons board in the sheriff's office. Daniel Price. Vanished in 1989, long before Molly was born. The creature twisted violently. The two faces, Daniel's and Molly's, flickering in and out of its shifting form like trapped images on broken film. It clawed at the air, at the light, at anything that might hold it here. Mrs. Thanaporn screamed, not in fear, but in grief so raw it scraped the air. Her hands reached for Molly, but the man in the cap blocked her path. "Don't touch her yet," he warned. "She's not free until it lets go completely." The mirror in Mark's hand pulsed with a strange heat, as if it were alive, pulling at the shadows in slow, deliberate waves. Every time the black tendrils recoiled from Molly's body, they were drawn toward the mirror's surface, sinking into it like ink dissolving in water. Molly's breathing turned ragged, her small frame trembling. Her eyes, now brown again, flicked between Mark and her mother. "Mom, I'm so tired." The man in the cap moved closer to Mark, his voice barely above a whisper. "Keep holding it steady, no matter what you see." Mark's knuckles whitened on the mirror's frame as the creature suddenly surged upward, looming over them, its form ballooning into a mass of twisting limbs and gnashing teeth that didn't belong to any human or animal. The second face, Daniel's, stretched toward Mark, its mouth opening impossibly wide. "You don't understand," it hissed, the words grinding like stone. "She came to me." The candles below flared in unison, their flames bending toward the mirror. The smell of burning wax and iron filled the air. Mark's arm trembled from the pull, the weight of something far older and darker than anything he'd faced before. Molly cried out, clutching her chest. The thing's grip on her faltered, its tendrils fraying into streams of smoke. But before the last of it could tear away, Daniel's face leaned forward, so close Mark could see the deep cracks running through its skin. "If you take her from me," it whispered, "you'll have to give me another." Mark's stomach dropped at the words. The thing's voice wasn't a threat. It was a promise, heavy with the weight of something that had bargained before. Mrs. Thanaporn's eyes darted between Mark and her daughter, panic flooding her face. No, you can't listen to it," she pleaded. "She's my only child." The man in the cap didn't flinch. His gaze locked on Mark. "It always takes someone. That's how it stays. If you want her free, you have to decide who goes in her place." Mark's grip tightened on the mirror, the glass swirling violently now, as though impatient for an answer. The pull on his arm grew stronger, the hum deepening into a low, bone-deep vibration. Below them, Molly's eyes welled with tears. She shook her head slowly. "I don't want anyone else to go," she whispered. Her small voice cracked, the sound breaking something in Mark's chest. The creature's tendrils slithered across the floor, curling toward Mark's boots. Every shadow in the tower seemed to be bending toward him now, waiting, pressing, urging. "Choose!" The thing hissed, Daniel's and Molly's voices layered together in a sickening harmony. "Or I take you all." The man in the cap stepped closer, his hand hovering over the pouch. "Once it gets a name, it won't stop. You have to be sure." Mark's mind raced, faces flashing before his eyes. People in town, people who looked the other way when Molly vanished, people who might deserve it. And then one face lingered longer than the rest. He knew the name, and he knew saying it would damn someone forever. The mirror in his hand pulsed one final time, warm as blood. The shadows leaned in, waiting. Mark opened his mouth. The name trembled on his tongue, a single word that could seal a fate. The air in the tower felt heavier now, thick and electric, like the moment before a lightning strike. Molly's tear-streaked face blurred in his vision. Her small hands clutched her chest as if she already knew what was coming. Mrs. Thanaporn stepped forward, desperation burning in her eyes. "Mark, don't do this. We can find another way." The creature's tendrils curled tighter around the platform's edges, its two faces shifting in and out of view. Daniel's cracked mouth stretched into something like a smile. "There is no other way." The man in the cap's voice cut through the air. "Say it, or lose her forever." Mark's jaw clenched. The name pressed harder against the back of his teeth. He could see the face of the one he'd chosen. Someone who had lied. Someone who had buried truth to save themselves. Someone who might even deserve this. But in the space between heartbeats, Molly whispered, "Please, not them." Her words stopped him cold. The tendrils tightened around her arms, and the creature leaned in so close its breath swept across Mark's cheek. "Then who?" it rasped. The humming in the mirror grew louder, vibrating through his bones. Mark's vision tunneled, the edges darkening, the pull from the glass demanding a sacrifice. And before he could think twice, his lips moved, shaping a name that no one else in that tower. The name slipped from his mouth like a confession, sharp and final in the still air. Mrs. Thanaporn's eyes widened, a mix of shock and something else, recognition. The man in the cap froze, his gaze locking on Mark as if he'd just thrown a stone into the deepest, blackest part of the lake. The creature reacted instantly. Its tendrils recoiled from Molly, whipping through the air like furious snakes. Daniel's face twisted into a grotesque grin, teeth splintering into jagged shards. "So be it," it hissed. The shadows surged upward, swirling around the mirror in a violent spiral. The hum became a roar, the glass surface boiling like black water in a storm. Mark's arm burned from the heat, but he didn't let go. Molly collapsed to her knees, gasping, the black gone from her eyes. Mrs. Thanaporn darted forward, cradling her daughter as if afraid she might vanish again. But neither of them looked at the swirling darkness. They didn't want to see what was about to be taken. From within the shadows, a shape began to form. At first, it was smoke. Then it became flesh. And then it was the person Mark had named. Their eyes were wide, wild, as if they'd been ripped from somewhere safe and thrown into a nightmare they couldn't understand. They opened their mouth to scream. But the creature's tendrils struck first, wrapping tight around their limbs, dragging them toward the mirror's surface. They fought, kicked, clawed, but every movement only pulled them deeper into the black. The sound that left their throat was something no human should ever make. Mark forced himself to watch. The man in the cap did not look away. And just before the last of them disappeared into the mirror, their eyes locked on Mark's. It wasn't fear in them anymore. It was hate. The shadows snapped back into the glass, the surface smoothing into stillness once more. The mirror cooled in Mark's hand. And in the sudden quiet, Molly whispered, her voice trembling, "What happens to them now?" Mark didn't answer right away. The question hung in the damp air, heavier than the scent of burnt wax and incense, still clinging to the tower walls. He stared down at the mirror in his hand, its surface dark and calm now, reflecting nothing. Not the candles, not the faces around him, not even his own. The man in the cap stepped forward, his voice low. "They're where the others are, where Daniel went, where it waits between taking and keeping." Mrs. Thanaporn tightened her arms around Molly, shielding her from the words as if they could cut. Molly's gaze didn't leave Mark. Her eyes were steady, too steady for a child who had just been freed from something like that. Mark forced himself to meet her stare. "They're not coming back," he said, his voice flat, almost hollow. The man in the cap didn't move, but there was a glimmer of approval, or maybe relief, in his expression. "You made a choice most can't," he said, "but you've tied yourself to it now. It knows your name. It knows your face. And someday," he let the thought trail off, the weight of it filling the silence. A faint tapping sound interrupted them. It came from the mirror, soft, like fingernails brushing glass from the inside. Once, twice, then a slow, deliberate drag, as if whoever was in there wanted Mark to know they were still trying to reach him. He clenched his hand around the frame until his knuckles whitened, but he didn't look away from Molly. "Don't go near this again," he told her. "Not ever." The man in the cap stepped closer, holding the empty pouch open. Mark hesitated before sliding the mirror back inside. As the red thread tightened around the fabric, the tapping stopped. But in the corner of the tower, beyond the reach of the candles, something shifted. A shadow detached itself from the wall, thin and tall, and moved toward the stairs without a sound. Mark's eyes followed it, a cold realization crawling up his spine. The thing hadn't left with the mirror. Not all of it. The beam caught their features in jagged slices of light and shadow. The skin looked wrong, too smooth in some places, cracked and flaking in others, as if pieced together by impatient hands. The eyes were darker than he remembered, but they were the same eyes that had glared at him in hate before being pulled into the mirror. They didn't blink, didn't breathe. They just stood at the bottom of the stairs, head tilted slightly, as if listening to some distant rhythm. Mrs. Thanaporn's grip on Molly tightened, pulling her farther back into the curve of the wall. Molly's voice was a whisper barely above the sound of the rain outside. "It's not them anymore." The man in the cap stepped in front of Mark, his stance deliberate, steady. "It'll wear that face until it finds a new one. It's here to finish what you started." Mark swallowed hard, the weight of his choice pressing down heavier than the air in the tower. The figure moved, slow, deliberate steps up the metal stairs, each one groaning under its weight. The humming continued, but now it was joined by a faint tapping, like nails dragging along the railing. When it reached the halfway point, it stopped. Its mouth opened, and in the voice of the person he had condemned, it spoke. "You gave me to it. Now I'll give it you." The man in the cap's voice dropped to a low growl. "Get them out of here, Harris. Now." Mark hesitated only a second before moving toward Mrs. Thanaporn and Molly, guiding them toward the opposite set of stairs that spiraled down the tower's far side. Behind him, the man in the cap stayed rooted in place, his hand slipping inside his coat for something Mark didn't get the chance to see. They descended quickly, the metal vibrating under their feet as the figure began climbing faster on the other side, matching their pace step for step. When they reached the bottom, the wind hit them cold, sharp, carrying the smell of rain and wet earth. Mark turned just long enough to see the man in the cap at the top platform, standing between the figure and the pouch in Mark's hand. For a brief second, their eyes met. There was no fear in his, only a grim finality. Then the wind roared, the tower shuddered, and something inside let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite human. Mark didn't look back again. He tightened his grip on the pouch and ran into the night, the rain swallowing the sound of footsteps that still followed far too close behind. The cornfield swallowed them in seconds, the stalks bending and swaying under the weight of the rain. Mud clung to Mark's boots, pulling at every step as if the ground itself wanted to keep him there. Behind him, he could still hear it. The faint crunch of something moving to the rows, deliberate, unhurried, never losing pace. Mrs. Thanaporn stumbled once, but Mark caught her arm before she fell. Molly clung to her mother's side, her eyes darting toward every shadow, every flicker of movement in the dark. She hadn't spoken since they left the tower, but her small hand was wrapped tight around Mark's coat, as if letting go meant being taken back. The rain softened, turning into a mist that clung to their skin. Somewhere behind them, the humming began again, low, almost gentle, threading through the night like it belonged here. Mark's breath came heavy, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He could see the outline of the road ahead, a thin ribbon of gravel cutting through the fields. If they reached it, maybe they could find help, if help was even possible. They broke through the last line of corn, stepping onto the wet gravel. Mark turned, scanning the field. The humming had stopped. Only the whisper of wind through the stalks remained. Mrs. Thanaporn's voice trembled. "Is it gone?" Mark didn't answer. His hand went to the pouch at his side, feeling the weight of the mirror inside. It was cold again, but heavier, as if something else had joined it. Molly finally spoke, her voice soft but certain. "It's not gone. It's waiting." The road stretched empty in both directions, swallowed by darkness. Mark's gaze lingered on the black ahead, his mind replaying the sound of that voice wearing the face he'd sacrificed. He knew what the man in the cap had meant. Some doors never closed. Some debts never ended. Mark took a breath, tightened his grip on the pouch, and started walking into the dark. Not because he thought they were safe, but because he knew something was already walking there with them. They didn't stop walking until sky began to pale at the edges, a thin gray light bleeding into the mist. The road led them to a faded roadside diner, its neon sign flickering weakly in the dawn. Inside, the warmth was almost startling, the hiss of the coffee machine loud in the stillness. Mark slid into a booth with his back to the wall, keeping the pouch close. Mrs. Thanaporn sat across from him, holding Molly so tightly it was as though she feared the morning light might still take her away. A waitress with tired eyes poured coffee without asking. She glanced at Molly, then at the pouch, but said nothing. Mark noticed her hand tremble slightly when she set down the pot. The hours passed in silence, the three of them waiting for something neither of them could name. Finally, Mrs. Thanaporn broke the quiet. "What now?" Mark stared into the dark swirl of his coffee, the mirror's cold weight pressing against his side. "We keep moving," he said. "Never in one place too long. It can follow, but it takes longer if it can't find a door." Molly's voice was barely above a whisper. "It will come for you." Mark met her gaze. "I know." He stood, sliding the pouch into his coat pocket, the faintest tap coming from inside, once, twice, before falling silent again. He didn't look back as he stepped outside into the gray morning, the wet road stretching endlessly ahead. Somewhere far behind them, in the cornfield beyond the tower, the wind carried a sound too soft for most to notice. A low hum, weaving through the stalks, patient and unending. It would wait, and Mark knew when it came again, he'd be ready.